The stars looked different this far from Earth. Marine Sergeant Jake Collins pressed his face against the small window of the exploration ship Dawn's Edge and watched the alien sun cast strange shadows across the planet below. 3 years he had been traveling through space, but this was the first world that actually looked alive. "Sergeant Collins, report to the bridge," came the voice through the ship's speakers. Jake straightened his uniform and walked down the narrow hallway. The Dawn's Edge was not a big ship, built for speed and exploration rather than comfort. Captain Sam Mitchell stood looking at the large screen showing the planet's surface. "Jake, we're seeing structures down there, buildings, maybe even cities. This could be our first real contact with intelligent alien life." Jake nodded. He had trained for this moment his entire military career, but now that it was here, his stomach felt tight with nerves. "What's the plan, sir?" "Take your team down for a quick look. Standard first contact protocol. Be friendly, but be ready for anything." The captain turned to face Jake. "Remember, we represent all of humanity down there." An hour later, Jake sat in the small landing shuttle with his team. Medical Officer Lisa Park checked her equipment for the 3rd time. "I still think we should wait for more ships to arrive," she said. "What if they're hostile?" "That's why we're going in small," Jake replied, "less threatening that way." He looked at the other 2 members of his team. Communications Officer Amy Carter was young but smart, and Chief Engineer Ben Torres had more experience with alien technology than anyone else in the fleet. The shuttle touched down in a clearing near what looked like a small settlement. Through the windows, they could see strange buildings that seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built on top of it. Everything was quiet. "Atmosphere is breathable," Lisa announced, checking her readings. "But I recommend we keep our helmets on just in case." They stepped out of the shuttle onto alien soil. The ground felt springy under their boots, and the air smelled like pine trees mixed with something Jake couldn't identify. The buildings around them were empty, but they could hear sounds in the distance. "Movement, 2 o'clock, Ben whispered, pointing toward a cluster of larger structures. What came out of the shadows made Jake's breath catch in his throat. They looked like giant wolves, but they walked on 2 legs like humans. Their fur was dark gray with silver markings, and their eyes glowed yellow in the dim light. The largest one, clearly the leader, had scars across his muzzle and moved with the confidence of a predator who had never known fear. "Remember, peaceful contact," Jake whispered to his team. He raised his hands, palms open, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The lead alien tilted his head and made a sound that might have been laughter. Then he spoke in a deep, growling voice that somehow Jake could almost understand. "Weak things come to our world. Small, soft." Amy's translation device beeped softly. "I'm getting some basic language patterns," she whispered. "Give me a few more minutes." But the aliens were not interested in waiting. The leader, who Jake would later learn was called Razormaw, stepped forward. His pack spread out behind him, surrounding the humans. "You do not belong here, soft ones. This is Kethvar territory." "We come in peace," Jake said clearly, hoping the tone would translate even if the words didn't. "We just want to talk." Razormaw's lips pulled back, showing teeth like white daggers. "Talk is for the weak. The strong take what they want." The attack came without further warning. 3 of the aliens lunged forward, claws extended. Jake dove to one side, pulling his weapon free. "Defensive positions," he shouted. The next few minutes were chaos. The Kethvar were fast and strong, but the humans had better weapons and training. Energy blasts lit up the clearing as both sides fought for their lives. Lisa cried out as claws raked across her arm, but Ben pulled her to safety behind the shuttle. Jake found himself face to face with Razormaw. The alien leader was bigger and stronger, but Jake was quicker. He managed to land several shots, and the alien fell backward with a roar of pain and anger. "Fall back to the ship," Jake ordered. The Kethvar were retreating, carrying their wounded with them. But as the sounds of battle faded, Jake heard something else. Soft whimpering sounds coming from behind one of the strange buildings. "Jake, we need to go," Lisa called from the shuttle. Her arm was bandaged, but she was ready to fly. But Jake couldn't move. He walked slowly toward the sounds, his weapon ready. Behind a fallen tree, he found them, 3 small HFY, barely half the size of the adults. Their fur was lighter, more brown than gray, and their eyes were wide with terror. One of them, the smallest, had blood on its leg. "Oh no," Amy breathed, coming up behind Jake. "They're just children." The young HFY pressed against each other, too scared to run but too proud to beg. Near them lay 2 adult bodies, probably their parents, killed in the fighting. The pack had left them behind in their retreat. "We can't take them," Ben said firmly. "They're predators. They'll grow up to be like the ones who just tried to kill us." Jake knelt down, staying far enough away that the cubs wouldn't feel trapped. The smallest one watched him with intelligent eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Hope, maybe. Or just the desperate need for someone to care. "Jake," Lisa said more gently, "even if we wanted to help them, we don't know anything about their biology. They might not even survive on our ship." The largest of the 3 cubs made a soft sound, almost like a purr. It was trying to comfort the injured one. In that moment, Jake saw something that made his decision. These weren't monsters. They were children who had just lost everything they knew. "We're taking them," Jake said, standing up. "I won't leave. Orphaned kids to die alone no matter what species they are." "This is against all protocols," Ben protested. "Then we'll change the protocols." Jake moved closer to the cubs. They tensed but didn't run. "Amy, can you tell them we want to help?" Amy worked with her translator for a moment, then made a series of soft sounds. The cubs looked at each other, then back at the humans. The smallest one took a hesitant step forward. "That's it," Jake said softly. "We're not going to hurt you." It took another hour to coax the cubs into the shuttle. They huddled together in the back, watching the humans with wary eyes. As the Dawn's Edge lifted off from the planet, Jake looked back at the 3 small aliens and wondered what he had just started. He didn't know it yet, but he had just changed the course of galactic history. The 3 HFY cubs had not eaten in 4 days. They sat in the corner of the makeshift room Jake had prepared for them, pressed against each other like scared puppies. The smallest one, who Jake had started calling Scout because of its curious nature, would sometimes lift its head when Jake entered the room, but the other 2 just stared at the wall. Dr. Gary Stone, the ship's xenobiologist, stood outside their room shaking his head. "This is insanity, Sergeant. These are apex predators. In 6 months, they'll be big enough to tear a human apart with their bare claws." Jake watched through the clear barrier as Scout's ears twitched at the sound of their voices. "They're children, Doc. Lost, scared children." "They're aliens," Gary replied firmly. "We don't know how their minds work. What seems like intelligence might just be instinct. You could be raising 3 killing machines." Inside the room, the cubs had arranged themselves, so the injured one was in the middle. The largest cub, who Jake called Hunter because of its protective instincts, kept licking the wounded leg of the 3rd cub, Shadow. It was clear they cared for each other, but they wouldn't let any human close enough to help with medical treatment. Lisa Park joined them in the hallway. Her own arm was healing, well from the HFY attack. "I've been studying their biology from the scans we took," she said. "They're definitely carnivores, but their stomachs can handle some plant matter too. The problem is they won't eat anything we offer them." Jake had tried everything: raw meat, cooked meat, even some of the native plants they had collected from the planet. The cubs would sniff the food when he left it near their sleeping area, but they never touched it. "Maybe they don't trust us," Amy Carter suggested. She had been working around the clock to understand the HFY language. In pack animals, food sharing is often a sign of acceptance into the group. That gave Jake an idea. That evening, instead of just leaving food for the cubs, he sat down outside their enclosure and began eating his own military ration. The cubs watched him carefully. Scout's nose twitched as it caught the smell of Jake's food. Jake took a small piece of the meat from his meal and placed it just inside the barrier where the cubs could reach it. Then he continued eating his own portion, pretending not to watch them. For a long time, nothing happened. Then Scout crept forward on its belly, moving so slowly Jake almost missed it. The young Keithvar sniffed the offered food, looked back at Jake, then quickly grabbed the meat and returned to its siblings. Progress, Jake whispered to himself. Over the next few days, Jake repeated this ritual. Each time, Scout became a little braver, staying closer to the barrier while it ate. Hunter and Shadow began to watch more closely too, though they still wouldn't approach. The breakthrough came during an emergency. The Dawn's Edge was traveling through an asteroid field when a large rock struck their hull. Alarms screamed through the ship as the air pressure dropped in several sections. Hull breach in Section 7, Ben Torres called over the intercom. All crew to emergency stations. Jake was suiting up for emergency repairs when he realized Section 7 was right next to where the Cubs were housed. He ran down the hallway and found their room filled with smoke. The barrier had cracked from the impact, and the Cubs were huddled together, coughing and afraid. Without thinking, Jake smashed the rest of the barrier and rushed into the smoke-filled room. "Come on," he shouted, reaching for the Cubs. "We have to get out of here." Scout looked at Jake's outstretched hand, then at its siblings. The ship shuddered again as another asteroid hit. Part of the ceiling began to crack. Jake could have saved himself. He could have run for safety and let the Cubs figure out their own escape. Instead, he scooped up Shadow, the injured one, and looked at Scout and Hunter. "Please," he said, his voice desperate. "Trust me." For a moment that felt like forever, the two Cubs stared at him. Then Scout took a step forward and Hunter followed. Jake led them through the smoke and debris to the safety of the main corridor, just as the room behind them collapsed. Later, after the emergency was over and the ship was safe, Jake sat in the new room they had prepared for the Cubs. This time, all three of them approached him. Scout actually touched Jake's hand with its nose, a gesture Amy's research suggested was similar to a handshake among Keithvar. "Thank you," Scout said in carefully pronounced human words. Amy had been teaching the Cubs basic English, but this was the first time any of them had tried to speak directly to Jake. Jake felt tears in his eyes. "You're welcome." From that day on, everything changed. The Cubs began eating regularly, not just Jake's offerings, but the food the ship's kitchen prepared specially for them. They started exploring their room instead of just huddling in the corner. Most importantly, they began to trust. Scout became Jake's constant shadow, following him around the ship whenever possible. The young Keithvar was incredibly smart, picking up human customs and language faster than anyone expected. It asked endless questions about everything from the ship's engines to why humans wore clothes. Hunter showed a natural talent for understanding how things worked. Ben Torres found the Cub watching him repair a broken power conduit one day and was amazed when Hunter pointed out a loose connection Ben had missed. "It's like it can see the flow of energy," Ben told Jake later. "I've never seen anything like it." Shadow was the quietest of the three, but also the most observant. It seemed to sense danger before anyone else, always positioning itself between the humans and potential threats. When a minor fire broke out in the kitchen, Shadow alerted the crew before the smoke detectors even went off. As the weeks passed, the Cubs grew larger and stronger, but instead of becoming more dangerous, they became more protective of their human family. When a training exercise went wrong and Jake was knocked unconscious, all three Cubs stood guard over him until Lisa arrived with medical help. The transformation was remarkable. 3 scared, orphaned predators had become loyal members of the crew. They learned to use human tools, understand human emotions, and even developed their own personalities within the human social structure. But their peaceful journey was about to end. Long-range sensors detected ships approaching the Dawn's Edge. Keithvar ships moving fast and armed for war. Captain Mitchell called Jake to the bridge. "They're hailing us," he said grimly. "They want their Cubs back." Through the main view screen, Jake could see the lead Keithvar ship. It was massive, bristling with weapons that could destroy the Dawn's Edge in seconds. But when Jake looked back, at Scout, Hunter, and Shadow, who had followed him to the bridge, he saw something that made his decision easy. The Cubs weren't cowering in fear. They were standing close to Jake and the other humans, ready to defend their chosen family. They had made their choice, and Jake would honor it. "Tell them," Jake said to Amy, "that the Cubs are staying with us. They're part of our pack now. 6 months had passed since Jake first found the 3 cubs, and they had grown into impressive young adults. Scout now stood almost as tall as Jake's shoulder, with keen intelligence shining in its golden eyes. Hunter had developed powerful shoulders and arms from working alongside Ben Torres in the engine room. Shadow moved like liquid darkness, always watching, always alert. The Dawn's Edge had become their home, and the crew had become their family. But family, as Jake was about to learn, sometimes meant making hard choices. The Kethvar fleet that appeared on their sensors was unlike anything they had seen before. 20 massive warships surrounded the Dawn's Edge, their weapons powered up and ready to fire. The lead ship was 3 times the size of their exploration vessel. "Incoming transmission," Amy announced from her communication station. Her voice was tense. "It's coming from the flagship." Captain Mitchell nodded. "Put it on screen." The view screen filled with the image of a Kethvar commander Jake recognized. Razormaw, the pack leader from the planet. But now he wore elaborate armor and bore the marks of high rank. His scarred muzzle was twisted in anger. "Human vessel," Razormaw growled, his voice carrying clearly through the translation system Amy had perfected. "You carry stolen property of the Kethvar people. Return our young ones immediately." Jake felt Scout tense beside him. All 3 cubs had insisted on being present for this confrontation, despite the crew's concerns for their safety. They stood together, but they stood with the humans. Captain Mitchell stepped forward. "The cubs are not property. They're intelligent beings who have chosen to stay with us." Razormaw's lips pulled back in a snarl. "Impossible. No Kethvar abandons the pack. You have corrupted them with your weakness, made them forget their nature." "Our nature," Scout said suddenly, stepping forward, "is to choose our own path." The effect on the Kethvar bridge was immediate and shocking. Several of the alien warriors stepped back as if Scout had struck them. Razormaw's eyes widened with what looked like genuine fear. "You taught them to speak against their elders," he whispered. "What have you done to our cubs?" Hunter moved to stand beside Scout. "We learned that strength doesn't always mean violence. That family isn't just about blood." Shadow, usually the quietest, spoke last. "We choose to protect instead of hunt, to build instead of destroy." The transmission filled with angry voices as the Kethvar officers argued among themselves. Finally, Razormaw raised his hand for silence. "This is an abomination. You will return them to us so they can be properly re-educated, or we will take them by force." "That's not happening," Jake said firmly. He stepped forward so he was clearly visible on the screen. "These cubs are under my protection." Razormaw studied Jake for a long moment. "You are the one who stole them from the battlefield. I remember your scent." His voice dropped to a threatening growl. "You have 1 hour to surrender them, or your ship becomes debris." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Captain Mitchell turned to his crew. "Options?" "We can't fight them," Ben said honestly. "They outgun us 20-1. "We could try to run," suggested Lisa. "Jump to hyperspace before they can stop us." Amy shook her head. "I'm reading massive energy signatures from their ships. They have some kind of hyperspace inhibitor. We're not going anywhere." Jake looked at the 3 cubs, who had been listening to this discussion with growing alarm. They had learned enough about human technology to understand the situation. The Dawn's Edge was trapped, outnumbered, and outgunned. "There is another option," Scout said quietly. "We could go back to them." "No," Jake said immediately. "Absolutely not." "Jake is right," Hunter added, but his voice was uncertain. "But if our presence here puts you all in danger—" "We're a family," Jake interrupted, "and family doesn't abandon each other. We'll find another way." What happened next changed everything. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship as Amy detected massive energy signatures. "They're powering up weapons," she called out, "all ships targeting us." But before anyone could react, the ship shuddered as something impacted the hull. Not weapons fire, but boarding pods. The Kethvar weren't just threatening anymore. They were taking action. "Intruder alert," came Ben's voice over the intercom. "Multiple breaches on decks 3 and 4. Jake grabbed his weapon. "Lisa, Amy, Get to the emergency bunker. Ben, can you lock down the ship's systems? Already on it, Ben replied. But these boarding pods are tough. They're cutting through our security doors. The sound of energy weapons echoed through the corridors. Jake could hear human shouts and Kethvar roars getting closer. The cubs tensed, their predatory instincts awakening for the first time since joining the crew. Stay behind us, Jake ordered, but Scout shook its head. We won't hide while our family fights for us. The first Kethvar warriors appeared at the end of the corridor, their weapons raised. Jake aimed his rifle, but before he could fire, Scout leapt forward with a roar that shook the walls. What followed was unlike any battle Jake had ever seen. The cubs fought with all the speed and strength of their species, but they weren't fighting to kill. They were fighting to protect. Scout disarmed warriors instead of gutting them. Hunter used its size to pin enemies rather than crush them. Shadow moved like smoke, confusing the attackers and giving the human crew chances to stun rather than kill. The turning point came when Razor Maw himself appeared, leading a group of elite warriors toward the bridge. He expected to find the cubs cowering behind their human captors. Instead, he found them standing shoulder to shoulder with Jake and the crew, ready to fight their own kind to protect their chosen family. Stand down, Razor Maw ordered the cubs. You are Kethvar. These soft ones are prey, not pack. Scout looked directly into the pack leader's eyes. You're wrong. They saved us when you left us to die. They fed us when we were hungry. They protected us when we were afraid. The young Kethavar's voice grew stronger. They showed us what real strength looks like. The other cubs nodded. Hunter stepped forward. A true pack doesn't abandon its young. A true pack doesn't rule through fear. Shadow, barely audible but clear in the sudden silence, added, We found our real family. For a long moment nobody moved. The Kethvar warriors looked confused and uncertain. Some of them lowered their weapons slightly. Jake realized that this confrontation was about more than just 3 cubs. It was about everything the Kethvar believed about strength and family and loyalty. Razor Maw raised his weapon toward Jake. Then you will die with your false pack, corrupted ones. But before he could fire, something unexpected happened. Several of the younger Kethvar warriors stepped between him and the humans. They didn't point their weapons at their commander, but they made their position clear. These cubs speak truth, one of them said. Perhaps it is time to question the old ways. The standoff continued, with Kethvar facing Kethvar, while the humans watched in amazement. The cubs had done more than just choose a side. They had started a revolution in thinking that was spreading through the boarding party. Jake realized this was no longer just about getting the cubs back. This was about 2 completely different ideas of what it meant to be strong, to be family, to be alive. And the outcome would determine not just the fate of Scout, Hunter, and Shadow, but possibly the future of both species. The journey to Earth took 3 months, and every day brought new challenges. The Kethvar fleet followed them at a distance, waiting for the right moment to strike. Inside the Dawn's Edge, Scout, Hunter, and Shadow struggled with feelings they had never experienced before, doubt about their choices. Captain Mitchell had decided that Earth was their only hope. The human homeworld had defenses that might protect them, and politicians who could negotiate a peaceful solution. But Jake wasn't sure peace was possible anymore. I dream about them sometimes, Scout confided to Jake one evening as they sat in the ship's small observation lounge. My birth pack, I mean. I remember playing with other cubs in the sunlight on our homeworld. Jake looked at his friend, noticing how much Scout had grown. The young Kethvar now stood taller than most humans, with muscles that rippled under dark fur. But in Scout's golden eyes, Jake still saw the frightened child he had rescued. Do you regret coming with us? Jake asked quietly. Scout was quiet for a long time. No, he finally said. But sometimes I wonder what I lost when I chose this path. Hunter and Shadow feel it too. We're not fully Kethvar anymore, but we're not human either. What are we? It was a question Jake couldn't answer, but he knew they would face it together when they reached Earth. Earth's orbital defense stations detected them long before they arrived. Admiral Pete Rogers, commander of Earth's home fleet, contacted them while they were still days out from the planet. Dawn's Edge, this is Admiral Rogers. We've been monitoring the situation. We're prepared to offer you sanctuary, but I have to warn you, there's considerable debate about whether we should risk war with the Kethvar over 3 aliens. Captain Mitchell responded carefully. Admiral, these aren't just any aliens. They're individuals who chose to join humanity. If we abandon them now, what does that say about who we are? The debate on Earth was indeed fierce. Jake watched the news broadcast with growing concern. Politician Claire Brooks led a vocal group demanding that the cubs be returned to their people. We cannot risk the lives of billions of humans for 3 alien animals, she declared on the Planetary News Network. But there were supporters too. Videos of the cubs working alongside the crew, learning human customs, and protecting their human family had reached Earth months ago. Many people were moved by their story. Dr. Elena Martinez, a respected xenopsychologist, spoke passionately in their defense. These beings have shown us something remarkable, that intelligence and compassion can bridge any gap between species. They represent the best of what humanity could become in the galaxy. As the Dawn's Edge entered Earth's solar system, the cubs experienced their first glimpse of human civilization. The orbital stations, the busy traffic of ships, the blue-green planet that was humanity's birthplace, it all amazed them. So many humans, Hunter whispered, watching the view screen. I never imagined there were so many of you. Are they all like our crew? Shadow asked. Kind and protective? Jake wished he could say yes, but he knew better. Some are, he said honestly. Others are afraid of what they don't understand. Just like with any species. The reception on Earth was mixed. They landed at the main spaceport outside Geneva, where the Planetary Council met. Crowds of people waited behind security barriers, some holding signs welcoming the cubs, others demanding they be sent away. The cubs stayed close to Jake and the crew as they walked through the spaceport. The noise and crowds made them nervous, and their predatory instincts kept them constantly alert for threats. Murderers! Someone shouted from the crowd. Send the monsters back where they came from. Scout flinched as if struck. Jake put a protective hand on his friend's shoulder. Ignore them, they're just afraid. But the cubs couldn't ignore it entirely. As they settled into temporary quarters at the government complex, they overheard conversations about the alien problem and debates about whether non-humans could ever truly be trusted. Claire Brooks visited them on their 3rd day on Earth. She was a tall woman with sharp features and cold eyes. She looked at the cubs like they were dangerous animals barely held in check. I'm here to offer you a choice, she told them directly. Return to your people voluntarily, and Earth will provide safe passage. Refuse, and you'll be responsible for any war that follows. Scout stepped forward. We didn't choose to start a war. We only chose to stay with the family that saved us. Family? Brooks laughed harshly. You're predators, killers. Do you really think these humans would protect you if they saw your true nature? Hunter's voice was steady but sad. Our true nature is what you see. We choose to protect, not destroy. Pretty words, Brooks replied. But when your fleet arrives and humans start dying, we'll see how long that lasts. After she left, the cubs were quieter than usual. Jake found them in their quarters that evening, sitting close together like they used to on the ship. She's wrong, you know, Jake said. About your nature. Is she? Shadow asked softly. We are predators, Jake. We can feel it in our blood sometimes, the urge to hunt, to fight, to dominate. What if she's right? What if we don't belong anywhere? Jake sat down with them. You know what I think? I think nature isn't about what you're born with. It's about what you choose to do with what you have. You 3 chose to use your strength to protect instead of hurt. That makes you better than a lot of humans I've known. But their doubts grew worse when the Kethvar fleet arrived. Admiral, Rogers briefed them on the situation. 200 ships, he said grimly. The largest military force we've ever seen. They're demanding the cubs be turned over within 24 hours, or they'll start attacking our outer colonies. The Planetary Council held an emergency session. Jake and the cubs were allowed to attend, but only as observers. The debate was painful to watch. "We're talking about three individuals," argued Dr. Martinez. "Three beings who have committed no crime except choosing freedom. If we surrender them to prevent war, what happens the next time someone demands we abandon our principles?" "Our principles? Won't matter if we're all dead," Brooks shot back. "These aliens have brought nothing but trouble since they arrived. It's time to cut our losses." The vote was close, but Brooks won. By a margin of just 12 votes, the council decided to return the Cubs to the Kethvar fleet. That night, as Jake sat with Scout, Hunter, and Shadow for what might be their last time together, he felt like he had failed them completely. They had trusted him to keep them safe, and now he had to watch them be taken away. "We're not angry," Scout said, as if reading Jake's thoughts. "You gave us something no one can take away. You showed us that we could choose who to be. Maybe that will be enough," Hunter added quietly. "Maybe other Cubs will hear our story and know they have choices too." Shadow, always the most perceptive, looked directly at Jake. "This isn't over, is it? Something else is going to happen." Jake smiled sadly. "I don't know. But whatever happens, remember that you three changed everything. You proved that family isn't about species or blood. It's about love and loyalty and choosing to stand together." As Earth's morning dawned, the Cubs prepared to return to the Kethvar fleet. But unknown to everyone, the Council, the Admiral, even Jake himself, Scout had one final plan that would transform this moment of defeat into something entirely unexpected. The galaxy was about to learn that the Cubs had absorbed more than just human compassion during their time with the crew. They had also learned how to inspire others to choose courage over fear. The shuttle carrying Scout, Hunter, and Shadow toward the Kethvar flagship was silent except for the hum of engines. Jake sat across from them, officially their escort, but really just a friend who couldn't bear to let them face this alone. Admiral Rogers had given Jake permission to accompany the Cubs to the transfer point, though everyone expected it to be a final goodbye. Earth's defense fleet was already in position, preparing for the worst if negotiations failed. "Are you ready?" Jake asked as the Kethvar flagship grew larger on the shuttle's view screen. Scout looked at his brothers, then nodded. "We've been ready since we first chose you as family." What Jake didn't know was that Scout had spent the previous night working with Amy Carter on something that would change everything. Using the communication skills they had learned aboard the Dawn's Edge, the Cubs had prepared a message that would reach every Kethvar ship in the fleet. The docking bay of the flagship was filled with warriors. Razormaw stood at their center, his scarred face showing satisfaction at finally reclaiming what he saw as stolen property. Behind him were other pack leaders, all there to witness the return of the wayward Cubs. "So," Razormaw growled as the Cubs stepped off the shuttle, "the corrupted ones return home at last." Scout stepped forward, but instead of showing the submission Razormaw expected, he stood tall and proud. "We return to deliver a message." "You will deliver nothing but obedience," Razormaw snarled. "Your time with the soft ones has ended. Now, you will be re-educated in proper Kethvar ways." Hunter and Shadow moved to flank their brother. Together, they activated a small device Amy had hidden in Scout's fur, a transmitter that would broadcast their words to every ship in the fleet. "Hear us, children of the Kethvar!" Scout's voice rang out, not just in the docking bay but across the entire fleet. "We speak to you of choice, of freedom, and of a different kind of strength." Razormaw lunged forward, but Jake stepped between him and the Cubs. "Let them speak," Jake said calmly. "What are you afraid of?" The pack leader hesitated, realizing that attacking the human diplomat would ruin any chance of peaceful resolution. Around the docking bay, younger Kethvar warriors were listening intently to Scout's words. "We were orphaned on a battlefield," Hunter continued the broadcast. "Left to die by those who claimed to be our pack. The humans could have abandoned us, could have seen us as enemies. Instead, they showed us mercy. They fed us when we were hungry," Shadow added, his quiet voice carrying across the fleet. "Protected us when we were afraid. Taught us that true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." The response from the fleet was immediate and electric. On ships throughout the Armada, young Kethvar warriors began looking at each other with new eyes. Some of the older ones, too, began to question what they were hearing. "Lies!" Razor Maw roared, but his voice carried a note of desperation. "They have poisoned your minds with weakness." "Is love weakness?" Scout asked, his words reaching thousands of listeners. "Is choosing to protect instead of destroy weakness? Is caring for orphans weakness?" On the bridge of one of the fleet's smaller ships, a young Kethvar named Swiftclaw turned to her captain. "What if they're right? What if there's another way to be strong?" Similar conversations were happening on dozens of ships. The Cub's message was spreading like wildfire through the fleet, making warriors question everything they had been taught about strength and family. Razor Maw realized he was losing control. "Enough," he commanded, reaching for his weapon. "You will be silent." But before he could act, something unprecedented happened. Several of the younger warriors in the docking bay stepped forward, placing themselves between their pack leader and the Cubs. "Let them finish," one of them said. "We want to hear their words." The mutiny spread quickly. On ship after ship, young Kethvar began to openly question their commanders. Some demanded to know why Cubs had been left to die. Others asked why showing mercy was considered shameful. Admiral Rogers, monitoring the situation from his flagship, watched in amazement as the readings from the Kethvar fleet showed increasing chaos. Ships were breaking formation and communication channels were filled with arguments between officers and crew. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're detecting multiple ships separating from the main fleet. They're requesting permission to approach Earth peacefully." The Cubs had triggered exactly what Razor Maw had feared most: a complete breakdown of the rigid pack structure that held Kethvar society together. Young warriors who had never questioned orders were suddenly making their own choices. On the flagship, Razor Maw found himself surrounded by his own crew, many of whom were no longer certain they supported his mission. The Cubs had not just refused to submit, they had inspired open rebellion. "You have destroyed us," Razor Maw whispered to Scout. "Without unity, without the pack structure, we are nothing." "No," Scout replied gently. "You'll become something new, something better." Over the next several hours, the Kethvar fleet essentially dissolved. Some ships remained loyal to the old ways and departed for home, taking Razor Maw with them, but more than half chose to stay, requesting asylum and the chance to learn more about the human way of life. Jake found himself in charge of the largest first contact situation in human history. Thousands of young Kethvar, inspired by the Cubs' example, wanted to experience this new kind of family structure for themselves. The integration wasn't easy. Many humans remained fearful of the powerful predators, and many Kethvar struggled to understand concepts like individual choice and democratic decision-making. But slowly, carefully, with the Cubs serving as bridges between the species, something remarkable began to emerge. 2 years later, Jake stood on the balcony of his home in the first integrated colony, watching Scout teach a group of human children how to track animals in the forest, not to hunt them but to understand them and protect their habitats. Hunter had become the head engineer for a joint human-Kethvar construction project, building cities designed for both species. His natural understanding of energy flows had led to breakthrough technologies that benefited everyone. Shadow worked with Earth's security forces, his ability to sense danger making him invaluable in protecting both humans and Kethvar from those who still opposed integration. The Cubs had grown into adults, respected leaders in their community. They had never returned to their den, but they had created something new, a place where both species could thrive together. "Any regrets?" Jake asked Scout as they watched the children play. Scout considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if we had stayed with our birth pack. But then I see things like this." He gestured at the human and Kethvar children playing together without fear or prejudice. "And I know we made the right choice." "The hardest choice," Hunter added, joining them on the balcony. "But the right one?" Shadow appeared silently, as always. "Change is never easy, but some things are worth changing for." Jake smiled, watching as more young Kethvar arrived at the colony, seeking the freedom to choose their own paths. The cubs had done more than just survive their abandonment. They had transformed two entire civilizations. In the distance, ships from both worlds worked together to explore new stars and new possibilities. The Predator's cubs had chosen the human side, and in doing so, they had created a side where everyone could belong. The den they refused to return to was gone, replaced by something immeasurably better. A galaxy where family was defined, not by species or blood but by love, choice, and the courage to stand together against all odds. And in quiet moments like these, surrounded by the family they had chosen and the community they had helped build, Scout, Hunter, and Shadow knew they were exactly where they belonged.